I'm live in the lab with some Bob Marley. Bringing us into the lab, live in the lab, the sun is shining. But I can tell you it's not shining here in Manitoba today. Cloudy, gloomy day, rain everywhere. It's a fall day in Manitoba. I got to talk about the warm weather. Our guest, Joseph Santana, likes to spend, I think he spends a few months of the year probably in that warmer climate, which may be the reason we're bringing in some Bob Marley today. We're going to talk about music with Joseph coming up. Live in the lab, starting the week off on a Monday. If you missed our shows last week, we had some great shows. We ended the week off with Captain Steve Hoffman. We had Sir Darren Jacklin was here as well. And of course we had a guy who took $20. I'll tell you what, Brian Clayton, the lawnmower man, Brian Clayton turned $20 into millions and millions of dollars. And then he did it again. Yeah, it's incredible. So check out the lab shows from last week. They're in the archive. And while you're at it, click the subscribe button. So speaking of Joseph, why don't we put some Marley back on here, and why don't we bring in our guest today, Joseph Santana. So Joe's the CEO of Joseph Santana LLC, a leader in the forefront of driving business impacting diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. He helps organizations meet the challenges of the 21st century. Now, we know over the last number of years, DEI has become a hot topic for organizations around the globe. And clearly, Joseph has been at the center of those conversations. He's an accomplished writer. You'll read him in Forbes. He's got a successful podcast that we're going to talk about as well. But Joseph Santana, welcome to the lab.
Thank you for having me here, Keith. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so we brought you in with some Marley. I talked with you over the weekend just on email, and I said, Joseph, let's talk music for a second. What are your influences? And you flipped back to me. You said, well, Keith, oldies, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And I thought to myself, I grew up with classic rock, probably like yourself. Now I'm thinking to myself, Joseph, I don't know if they're oldies anymore. Are they like 60s and 70s? Like those are like ancient music. Is that not what it is these days?
That's right. Yeah. No, my taste in music are pretty eclectic. I mean, sometimes you'll hear coming, out of my speakers, you're an opera, or you'll hear something a little more classic. And then right after that on my playlist, you'll hear something else come up, like Bob Marley, who we mentioned before, or some old rock. But it just depends. In fact, when I'm running, I'm listening to all this different music sometimes, and it's enjoyable.
You said when you're running. So Joseph, you're clearly a business athlete, which is why I'm excited to welcome you into the lab. Music, love music. Running, well, I'm not known to have the longest legs on the planet, or maybe the most running-esque body, so it's perhaps not at the top of my list for physical fitness activities. Running, what does it mean to you, and how does it impact your life, and how has running impacted your business, Joseph?
I'll tell you, one of the things I found in my life is I never had a good idea while I was sitting down. So I sit in here and I work here and I talk to different people from here. But generally, my best ideas and my inspiration comes when I'm on the move. So a lot of times when I'm running, I put on my headset and I'm listening to music, or sometimes I'm listening to a podcast. It depends on how the mood strikes me, or an audiobook. And something about the music, or something about what that podcaster says, or whatever I'm listening to, plus whatever it is that my brain is working on in the background, and it clicks, and that becomes my next idea, or as I call them, my next hypothesis and experiment. I like to think of these ideas as being things that may seem great when you think about them. They may have legs, they may not. You just have to test them out a little bit first. But that's generally where my ideas come from. So I think for me, it's running. For other people, it's other stuff. But I think that when you're moving physically, your blood is coursing through your body, your brain is firing, your subconscious is working on whatever it is that you're working on. You don't have to actually attend to that consciously. That's when people come up with great ideas.
It's interesting. I never considered that concept of I've never had a good idea sitting. I have. I like to go and use physical fitness to maybe take those ideas and express upon them. But I find it interesting to you that when you're out running, that's where your creativity comes from. Joseph, do you run daily? Is it part of your lifestyle?
Yeah, it's part of my lifestyle. It's generally something I do it about 3 times, 4 times a week. And then I try to couple it with a little bit of weight training just to keep tone and so forth. But the same thing happens during weight training. Sometimes I'm doing a set and I'll get a great idea. I'll stop and I'll pause the music on my phone, and I'll pull up my notes, and I have a page that I have pinned where I just jot stuff down. I try to jot down, I'm not going to jot down an article about it, but just enough to help me remember later on what that idea was and why I thought it was a good idea to try out. So, if you ever ran into me walking around the gym, stop. I'm not just sitting there idly while someone is waiting for that machine. I'm sitting there writing very quickly just to capture that idea, because if I don't do it in the moment, I might forget it later on. But most of my good ideas come about when I am in some kind of activity, whether it's running, lifting weights, even swimming. Sometimes just like, I think you alluded to the fact that I live on an island for 2 months of the year. And so when I'm in St. Kitts, a lot of swimming opportunities. So sometimes I'm just in the water and gliding through from one beach area to another. It's like the brain is kind of like in the background, just working and coming up with different ideas. And what I like, which is to look at things from a nuanced standpoint and look at it, maybe turn that idea around a little bit and see other angles that maybe aren't as immediately obvious.
Share a technique with you that I use, Joseph, when it comes to ideas. My brain tends to churn out ideas left and right. I found myself sitting down with GPT-4 and talking about my ideas. I start a new conversation every time. So I used to jot ideas down in a notepad. I used to jot ideas down digitally, but then I recognized that they were just static sitting there, and I had a hard time maybe creating value or adding value from that idea. The moment I was introduced to GPT and the moment I was introduced to GPT-4 over time, I started a new conversation with my idea. And then what I like about it, Joseph, is I can get contrarian points of view. I can go back and forth, and then I can express that idea with somebody who's somebody, listen to me, I can express my idea with an entity or with something that is clearly has much more knowledge than I do, even though it's just an expanded dictionary of knowledge. But regardless of that point, it has been a remarkable way for me to take an idea from a seed and take it to either fruition, which became the lab concept, or death, because when you have something that you learn how to have a contrarian discussion with that idea. Have you considered, do you discuss your ideas with GPT or Claude or any AI?
I do, actually. I use ChatGPT a lot. I don't use it to create for me, but what I use it for is to take what I've created and move it around a little bit in different ways back to me. Sort of what you're talking about, which is to act as that feedback back to me again. One of the things that I think is really valuable about using ChatGPT that way, the way you're using it, and some of the ways I think I use it as well, is that if you just use ChatGPT to pull together information, especially in a topic like DEI, which is a topic that I write and talk a lot about. If you go in there and you just say, write an article about why DEI is such a wonderful thing, what you'll find is that it will basically assemble an article based on archived information that it's collected, right? Because it is basically a language processing system, but it's trapped within the limits of how people have talked and thought about that topic up to now. And I want to get away from that. I want to see outside that box. I want to see beyond those limits, because I found that it's beyond those limits that a lot of the real opportunities exist. So what I do a lot of times is I'll write a rough draft of my ideas and what I'm thinking. And then I'll put that in there and ask it, compare and contrast this with all the other information that you have on the topic of blah, blah, blah. And it just basically then begins to show. And then I have an opportunity then to begin to see either where my idea and the other idea bridges and connects, or where it departs from the other idea. But I like to use my own writing and a lot of my own creative thinking around these topics as fuel for that. Because if I just depend on the system, all it's going to do is regurgitate back to me again and again old ideas, some of which may have been really applicable in the 20th century, but they're not applicable now. The world has changed dramatically since a lot of what people tend to call best practices in certain areas were established. So I want to infuse it with creative ideas now. And the tool is really flexible. I mean, if you turn around and you put an article into ChatGPT and you ask it to take this article and compare and contrast it with other materials that are out there on this particular topic and to highlight where there are differences and similarities, it'll do it. It'll just take your article and combine it with everything else that's out there. So it's a good way for you to take new ideas and compare and contrast them with old ideas that are out there around the same subject.
Joseph, let's talk about our demographic for a second, if I may. How have you led our demographic with the usage of ChatGPT, the knowledge? How have people looked at you with a point of view of, like, what are you talking about? Or have people looked at you with a point of view of Joseph, I don't want to learn. I'm in my 50s, or I'm in my 60s, or in my late 40s. I don't want to have to learn this stuff. Yet you clearly know what you're talking about. You clearly use it on a daily basis. Talk about your peer group accepting you or looking away from you when you bring up ChatGPT.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I'm talking about this now because the way we're discussing it, the topic that we're on. But a lot of times, I don't so much bring that up as I bring up the actual core ideas that come out of all these different exercises. Mm-hmm. Now, if someone digs beneath the surface a little bit, they say, well, how are you developing some of this stuff and testing it? And how are you modeling these different ideas to figure out, well, what's going to be the secondary, tertiary effects and so forth of this development that you're looking at? Then I'll share with them that I use things like ChatGPT, and I use some futurist modeling tools and so forth to do that, determine things like what's the cone of possibilities and all that. But, what I find is it depends on who you're talking to. Generally, most people, I would say, and I'm only guessing, I haven't taken a poll on this, believe that, that's not for me. I'm already established in the way that I do things. But I will tell you that I find that people that are creative and people that are still in the game in terms of putting out ideas and trying to come up with solutions and trying to develop businesses or improve themselves in various ways are more open to it. Because I think that developing your business or your capability as a athlete has a lot to do with being open to recreating yourself and to creating better and better versions of yourself. And you don't know what those other versions are until you've had some experience under your belt and you've observed a couple of different things that other people are doing and tried out new things. That's the only way that you can expand your mind beyond that closed box, is to experience different things around you, either directly or by a variety of people that you surround yourself with, younger, older, from different countries and backgrounds. But you need to, I think that's critical to being successful in business today, because we're long past the day when someone can literally just go to school, get their credentials, and then go to work, and then take the same skill and do it again and again and again for the next 30 years, and then get a watch and go sit in the park and feed pigeons. Especially if you want to succeed and continue enjoying the fullness of life. I love learning new things and being exposed to new things, because it just gives life a new layer to it as well. So not only is it more productive and you're able to accomplish more, but it also makes life more interesting.
In conversation with Joseph Santana right now, we're talking about AI, ChatGPT, and ideas. I want to stay on ideas for a moment, Joseph. As an entrepreneur, as a business person, somebody with plenty of ideas, and I know our audience are probably similar people. Your ideas, do they come from a point of changing the world? Do they come from a point of, I want to make a lot of money from this idea? What are the seeds of your ideas, Joseph?
It's really interesting. I think that my ideas are motivated primarily by my own natural curiosity, combined with a need that I think really annoyed the heck out of people that were older than me when I was younger, and that now people actually reward me for, which is my disruptive tendencies. I tend to look at things as they're done and say, okay, this is the way it's done, but there's probably like 40 or 50 different ways in between this that haven't been explored, some better, some worse. Let's kick the tires around and find out. A lot of things that people do, like the topic that I talk about, let's take that topic because it's a topic that I'm really embedded in a lot. DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in organizations. A lot of the thought around that topic and the practices all came from the last century, somewhere in the 1960s and so forth and forward. So for the last 60 years, that topic has been a topic that has a lot to do with, let's correct the errors of the past. Let's create organizations where we treat people better. And it all fell into the lap of HR, as it were, to do all this. And a lot of organizations have been doing this to some degree, some better than others. But the bottom line is, if you look at the world today, the reason why organizations should be motivated to become more effective in understanding these topics and in leveraging them is because we're heading into a world that's more globally connected and more diverse than it's ever been before. Not only in the United States, where they predict that people that are considered to be part of minority groups will be the majority by 2040, 45, but also around the world. I mean, I travel a lot, as I'm sure you do. Go to London, go to Paris, go any of these places and look around, and you'll see, if you've been going to them often, the change that's happening around the people that make up the country. So you look at that, and it becomes clear. Two things become clear at the least, and those are: one, the workforce that we business people will need to draw from is going to be from a new pool. It's going to be from a pool that's very different from the pool that was available years ago. So we need to know how to get that workforce to want to work for us and engage them and be able to support them so they're successful, because when you have somebody working for you, their success is your success. The more effective they are selling or whatever they do for you, the more effective your organization is going to be. And the second thing is that new demographic, globally as well as locally, that represents your business, your future market. That's where you're going to be selling to. So maybe you want to make sure, if you're in the snack business, that you not only sell the cheesy, salty Cheetos that 200 million people like, but that you also add maybe the flaming hot Cheetos that the other 100 million like. So instead of having a 200 million market, you have a 300 million size market, right? So it becomes, at this point, the driver behind being able to do this effectively and understand it. It's not about correcting past wrongs or meeting HR compliance and checking boxes. It's about making your business viable and able to continue to function at the top of its game as the world around us is changing, the people that we hire as employees, as well as the markets that we sell to. And that's why some investors use it also as part of their risk matrix. They want to make sure that before they put out money and buy a stock, that company is going to put out dividends now, and it's going to continue to be viable going into the future. And that means that the organization has to be set up to succeed in the future. So that's a shift in the way that and the motivation for action that exists behind this topic. And yet, if you look at ChatGPT is a great example. Go to ChatGPT and write down, tell me the best reasons for pursuing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it will write an article for you that will have all the usual stuff about, it gives the company a good reputation, it helps you with compliance, you're a good social company because you're helping to correct errors. I mean, it'll give you all this stuff, and it will say nothing about the fact that this has become a critical business strategy in order for you to be able to pull in people to work for you and to be able to resonate with the current market. So I guess that's one example I would give.
Joseph, are companies keeping their DEI promises? According to recent statistics and recent articles that I have been reading, most people don't think so.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I'll tell you, the answer to that question is that generally it seems like they are not. But here's the thing. There's a massive difference between what companies think DEI is about in terms of how to engage employees and so forth, and what employees are looking at the other end of the spectrum. So in a lot of organizations, they think, well, we're celebrating, Women's Heritage Month or something like that. So we're doing great, right? Meantime, if you go over to the women and you ask them, are they keeping up with their promises of promoting DEI? And the senior leadership says, yeah, this is our 5th year running Women's Heritage Month. And then the women on the other side say, yeah, there's still a big pay disparity between what we get paid for doing the same work and what a guy gets paid. So people today have become increasingly more sophisticated in terms of what they're looking for. And a lot of practices that people had in the DEI space in the past grew from this HR trying to protect the company image, which was more about PR and how do we look to the rest of the world. So let's put a rainbow, because it's June and it's LGBTQ month. Let's put a rainbow on our website and our social media. And without much focus on how are people in the company actually experiencing the organization. So the reason why I gave you that little background is because when you ask that question, if you ask that question of a bunch of senior leaders, they tend to say, well, we're doing our best. And I think we're doing pretty well. You go to their employees and you ask, and they'll say like they're missing the mark. I mean, no, the answer is no, they're not keeping up with what their commitments are. And then in the larger point where everybody can probably agree is in terms of some of the commitments that organizations made, especially after the murder of George Floyd, they're not keeping those commitments. In general, a lot of companies are walking them back or they never really started them. What happened was everybody got caught up in the heat of the moment and they felt they had to make some kind of statement right away. So they ended up saying, I mean, I had one person I was talking to not too long ago who said that their company said, we're going to increase the number of women in our organization by 30%. Now, think about that. If you've got an organization with, let's say, 5,000 people, and you're going to increase the number of women by 30%, who's leaving or who are you firing in order to make room to do that? That is impossible, actually, to do unless you're growing at an amazing rate or you're going to fire a bunch of people to make room for other people. It's probably illegal to do that anyway. But the bottom line is that promises made in haste generally were later on repented in leisure, and no one actually kept them or followed them up. And then the other is that promises made or commitments made, the challenges that sometimes what the organization thinks it's committing to doing, oh, we're going to celebrate Women Heritage Month and really show our support for women. And what employees want on the other side of the ledger is quite different. And what investors want on the other side of the ledger is quite different. And so is what the market wants. So I think it's those differences that sometimes lead to those disputes over whether people are meeting or not meeting promises.
Joseph, the challenge I have when organizations talk about DEI is that it appears that it's inauthentic. It appears that it's largely checkbox moments. Check the box, okay, check the box. I would argue that's one of the main reasons it's failing, is it does not come from a place of authenticity. It comes from a place of, okay, something happened in the news. We have to respond. So we have to go create a policy and check the box and create some content and media around it. And that's it. It's authentic, Joseph. I think, is that not one of the main reasons DEI fails at most organizations, that it's not real?
Well, in a lot of organizations, in a number of organizations, I don't know if a lot, but I will say in some organizations, quite a few organizations, it hasn't been real because it wasn't designed to be real. What it was designed to do. So what happened was, again, going back to the origin of it, is that incidents happened. Organizations felt like, for example, what happened in upstate New York back in the 60s, where there were the riots and so forth. And organizations said, well, this is really bad for us because our headquarters is here. We need to take some action. They took some action. Other organizations saw this. They started taking action. But the action that they were taking was to try to create these programs that were, we accept everyone and we want to bring in more women. We want to bring in more blacks. We want to bring in more. And essentially what they did was they turned it over to HR to do a lot of this stuff. And HR's job is to protect the company and protect the company's reputation. So when they were given this task, and on top of that, they were given the task of here are the different laws that are coming down about equal employment opportunity and all this other stuff. They have to do affirmative action plans where they show that they're doing outreach and they're trying to hire more women, more African Americans, more Asians, and so forth. If you read the fine print on a lot of this stuff, what the government is looking for is not that you're successful at it. What they're looking for is that you show that you're making a good faith effort, In other words, you get an A for trying if you can prove that you're trying. So a lot of the companies, what they do is they set up programs that are designed to create evidence that, look, we're trying. Look at how hard we're working at this. We're celebrating Women's Heritage Month. We're going to campuses and we're trying to bring in various groups and so forth. And so long as they can show that they're trying, and so long as they show a little bit of movement here and there, maybe they've got 10% of this and 5% of that, then they can check that box off, as you said before, and they're okay. The problem with that is that people in organizations, number one, they feel tokenized when they're brought in under those auspices of, look what a wonderful company we are. We hired Maria and we hired this other guy over here and whatever. That tokenizes people to some degree. And the other is that the actual structure of the organization, the way organizations are set up, they haven't changed it very much. So if you think back, right, if you think back to the 1950s and so forth, if you look at the history back then, you'll notice that back then, let's say you have a show like Leave It to Beaver, right? And Leave It to Beaver, mom is at home with Wally and Beaver, and dad goes out to work, and then he comes back, and this is the family and the home. And a lot of the policies that organizations have and so forth are set to support that structure. They're set to support Ward goes to work, mom is at home with the kids. She takes care of all the nurturing and so forth and the cooking and everything around that house. And he just comes back after he works hard day at work, and he pulls out his pipe and takes out his newspaper and reads and hands out advice every once in a while when Wally or Beaver are stuck, right? And a lot of organizations, their policies, their practices are designed as if that's still the world that we're living in. Except you and I know that nobody lives like that anymore, or very few people live like that anymore. So in a lot of cases, they're trying to bring people in, where you have couples, young couples of whatever demographic, where mom and dad both work and they have almost inadequate daycare, and yet the infrastructure of the company is not set up to handle that. So what's happened is, if we just take women, for example, the organizations are trying to show we're making a good effort to bring women in, but the policies and practices they have do not really support those women in being successful. So those women end up being frustrated because they can't on a dime say, I'm going to work till 9 o'clock every day if they've got a toddler, right? And so they are handicapped or hamstrung from being as effective within that organization. And those policies are not addressed. What organizations truly need to do is take a hard look at themselves and say, are we structured right now to support the modern workforce? And if not, what policies and practices from the past do we need to change to make it more effective? Then you're going to get an organization where people can be more effective, where people feel like they can succeed and contribute more. It's a win-win for everybody. But so long as we stick to, let's put a rainbow out there in June, and let's put some other symbol, and let's have a Taco Tuesday, and let's show that, we love everyone and we're really a good company, so we can check off that we're really trying hard box. It's not real, to your point. And I'll be the first one to say it's not real. That is essentially performative, and it's designed for PR, and it's designed to enable you to check off a box, and it's not designed to make your organization more effective in pulling in and supporting the new workforce and the emerging workforce, because every day it's becoming more diverse, or a global workforce.
I found myself part of an organization on a grand scale that was caught up in moments in time where it felt like it was checking the box while we had to react to certain cultural moments. Oh, we got to do something. Get everybody together. Let's do something. And it's felt very inauthentic. And I'll tell you something. I can only imagine how, use the word tokenization, or somebody feels tokenized. I felt tokenized having to follow through on the organization above me saying, no, we got to do this. And I'm like, yeah, but it's not real. But Keith, you have to do it because that's what we're doing. Yeah, but it just doesn't really feel real. I feel like I'm tokenizing the person that we're going to now tokenize. The whole experience is really uncomfortable when you really sit back and think about it. I have a question for you. I have another question for you. Since the pandemic, remote work has become an extremely hot topic. Why is remote work not part of the DE inclusion conversation?
It should be. And actually, DEI as a whole, in order to be effective, should be part of a business strategy that touches every part of the organization. And what I mean by that, it's not just about hiring. It's not just about, well, who do you promote? It's not about just that. It's also about, how do you fashion your products and your services so they address the need of this new market? How do you address the needs of this new workforce, which includes people that are remote and people that, and remote not only locally, but remote even going further out. They might live in a different country, or they might be digital nomads. That's the future of where we're going. And the only reason why organizations resist that to a great degree is because senior leaders are used to what they're used to. There was this recent article that came out where the CEO of Amazon, when pressed about why he had put out a mandate that everybody should go back to the office. And he was asked directly, so what's your data that this is a better way to work? He said, well, I really don't have data. And when he was pressed a little further, he came out and he said, well, the reason why I want to do this is because I spoke to, I think it was like 86 other CEOs, and we all agree that this is the best way to work. In other words, a bunch of old guys got together who are used to doing things a certain way, and they basically, in their echo chamber, they confirmed each other and felt that was a pretty decent poll, and they got a pretty good idea of what the world really wants. And the subject is considered to be closed. But the fact of the matter is that this is a bigger topic, and it's going to continue. It's not going to, people are not going to let up and say, well, we're going to go back to pre-pandemic days when 96% of the people were reporting to these workplaces. It's been proven that people can work from just about anywhere. And with technology advancing the way it is, there's a warehouse in Japan right now where the workers are in the Philippines running drone robots using virtual reality headsets. So think about that for a minute. That's the kind of work where you think you need a local populace, and here they're doing it remotely using modern technology. And that technology is only going to keep advancing by leaps and bounds. So it is a DEI topic. They're all actual DEI to some degree. DEI should not be sort of like a standalone topic. DEI needs to be a strategic consultant and advisor to everything from how do we go to market, how do we attract, how do we ensure, how do we broaden our perspectives in our organization? If you've got an organization that's made up of leaders who don't truly understand all the demographics of their own market because they are disconnected from that, and they're trying to sell products and services to that market, and they're sitting in a room doing a theory of mind of what the customer wants without actually having facts, you're going to have problems. You're going to have challenges. So I think that, yeah, DEI most definitely is part of that conversation. And it is a piece not only of inclusion, as you mentioned, but also equity in general. If you want women who have children, especially during a pandemic or other events that come up where school closes, and what are they going to do? Leave their toddler alone with a Zoom screen while they go to work? That doesn't work. We need to begin again to rebuild the workplace for the modern workforce using modern tools, as opposed to trying to stick to outdated 20th century practices.
It would seem that the waves are coming towards businesses of the future. DEI is not going away. Remote work, results only remote work is not going away. AI is in front of us. What are some of the other challenges that organizations face when they look in the mirror, those big three letters of DEI, Joseph?
Well, I mean, I think, again, as I said before, if you look at any demographic projection, it shows that the workforce is becoming increasingly diverse. In the United States, as I think I mentioned before, by 2045, the numbers are expected to shift significantly enough so that collectively people considered minorities will be the majority. And by the way, that's not even a hard to make futurist prediction, because those people that we're talking about, they're already here. They just happen to be around 10 years old at this point. As they grow up and they take over more and more roles in the workforce, that's when you're going to see that transformation. It's happening around us right now. Every year, they just said that between the last election and this election, there was like couple of million people that died and other millions of people that became eligible to vote. So the electorate body is changing. The workforce body is changing. The marketplace body is changing. And it's happening day by day, little by little. It's just marching in that direction. So you've got that. So right now, and the other thing is that even if we were to figure out how to address some of those challenges in terms of right now, some of the challenges that we have in different countries and around the world, around people working effectively together in organizations that support their effort, that support their work. Even if we solve those, we'll have new ones as we go deeper into the future. Some of the challenges that DEI addresses with regards to people and markets, those challenges have been with us all the way into the recesses of time, from the time of the Egyptians and the Greeks and so forth. There were always like different demographics and societies that were struggling to work effectively with each other, some subduing the others and turning them into their chattel labor. And then that switched around and it was another group. What makes anyone think that that's going to change going forward? It's not a bug in humans. It's a feature that we constantly have to work with and moderate. Benefits that DEI has for large organizations as well as small organizations or any group, even a solopreneur, is that diversifying your knowledge and diversifying the people that you're in contact with, the circles that you're dealing with, has always been and is the mother of creativity and innovation. If you look back all the way to the age of the printing press, how was the printing press created? Well, there was this thing back then called the coin mint, which was used to press coins by taking a mold of a shape with a denomination on it and pressing it on a piece of hot precious metal. And there was this other thing that was used, this press device that was used to press grapes to create wine. And what Johann Gutenberg did essentially was he took the concept of the mint, and that was the movable type that was created and then put on a block, which was then applied to a device that was essentially built very similar to the old wine press. And voila, we have the printing press. And now we can print pages instead of having monks spending hours writing them by hand. And almost every creative device that you've ever seen, almost every creative idea that you've seen out there usually comes from that. So for organizations, the benefit also, in addition to being able to pull in more people and engage them and deploy them effectively, being able to address new markets, for organizations or individuals that want to be creative, it's that ability to combine and marry different ideas. I talked to you about the Philippines, right? A little while ago, where the Japanese have a warehouse. They combine the power of robotics or robotic armatures and so forth with virtual reality to create a warehouse that's got robot drones in it operated by people out in the Philippines. And for the people out there that are listening who are sports enthusiasts and are thinking about how this might apply to sports, you don't have to go any further than to think about Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger, who won many awards as a bodybuilder, interesting enough, I don't know if you've ever watched any of his videos, but one of his videos, he talks about how, I think it was one of his girlfriends who was taking ballet, and he went to this thing and he looked at it and it occurred to him that they really have good posture and good form. And if I could learn that together with the weightlifting that I'm doing, I think I could blow people away. And guess what he did? He took ballet lessons. And I don't know if you remember some of the videos, how smooth his posing was compared to some of the others. Some of the others look like they just kind of hulked up there and then they bulked out their muscles. But he did it like it was completely choreographed. It was a thing of beauty to watch him flow from one move to the other, but it was all because he also learned ballet. So whether you're in sports, in business, large business, small business, there's a benefit to diversifying the information that's around you and using that to spur your creativity.
Joseph, does society need to be looking at new descriptions when it comes to inclusion? Because we continue to use words like minority, majority, they, that. When you hear us use those, and I mean us as human beings use those terms, it becomes very difficult to create an inclusive conversation when we're always referring to they or a them or a minority or a majority. And is that not a conflict in itself?
Yeah, it is. And I'll tell you, it's really interesting because I just put out an article on the topic that organizations that want to be global need to come up with new language. But if you think about some of the things that I suggest in that article, they even apply locally to, let's say, the United States, Canada, and other places where they've had these programs going for a while. So instead of using, what does underrepresented means? Like, oh, these are underrepresented people. What does that mean? Well, underrepresented assumes that there is a proper level of representation, right? What is that proper level? I don't know what it is. I don't think anybody does. But that language comes from this world of compliance and looking at like, well, you got no women here, so women are underrepresented. And that means nothing when you take that language and you put it into different parts of the world. So now as companies become more global, it becomes even harder for them to talk about this stuff because they're talking to people who don't use the same terms. So what I'm suggesting in the article that I think is more accurate, and I'd love to test this on you as well, is instead of talking about the effort being designed to address underrepresentation or address the inclusion of the underrepresented or they or whatever other term, why don't we just say that what the effort is trying to do is to create organizations or to fashion organizations so that they're more effective in supporting people that have been undersupported in the past. Because I think that's really, people aren't underrepresented because they're not just present, they're unsupported. A woman who goes to work in a company that expects her to work, her and her husband to work as if they were living in the Leave It to Beaver era, is not properly supported to succeed. It's not that they're, I don't care what nationality or what demographic they are, they're undersupported. If you use the word undersupported and you're talking, let's say, in Europe, and you're saying, well, who are your undersupported people? It depends on where you are. In some countries, it might be the Roma people. In other countries, it might be Muslims who aren't effectively brought into the workforce. In other countries, it might be usually women plus some other group, but it'll vary enough. If you're in India, it might be the Dalits versus the Brahmins, right? But that word undersupported, that question of who is undersupported and how do we make the organization able to support their success better? Because again, if you're only going to use part of your population to run your organization, you're handicapping yourself. And if you're bringing people into an organization because you want to have representation and say, well, we got 2 of these, 4 of these, 5 of these, but you're not going to support them properly, they're not going to be able to perform at their best. And that's also going to water down your ability to be productive. So I think that, yes, the language, especially now that we're becoming more global, and especially now that we need to start looking at this as a business strategy and not as a legal compliance strategy. Words like underrepresented and so forth are relics of our 20th century thinking about these topics.
You're here with Keith Bilous and Joseph Santana, live in the lab, live in the Business Athlete Performance Lab. Coming up on the end of our hour together. Joseph, let's go down this path if we can. I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to relate it back to DEI. Do you believe humans will go to Mars one day?
Yes.
Then it's easy for you as a futurist, and it's easy for somebody who as a DEI expert can see the problems for global, you've used the term numerous times, for global organizations when we start having to interact with, and I'll use the term Martians, because we do know that eventually there will be beings born on Mars and they will not be Earthlings. I know this is bizarre to have this conversation, but it's truthful. So we're going to have Earthlings, we're going to have Martians. So not only is DEI important today, but I would argue to you that it might be one of the most strategically important topics for organizations for the next 50 years. Would you agree with me?
I believe it is. I believe it is. And I agree with you. I mean, I think that when we talk about Martians, just to be clear, if we're talking about people who, let's say, colonize Mars, who originally came from Earth, but now start living there, and they start having children there in habitats that are there. And you think, well, but they're human beings. Yeah, but think about the way people feel about people who came from their country, moved to another country, and established a separate culture from the culture they came from, right? Differences begin to happen. Look at the way a Brit speaks versus the way an American or a Canadian or an Australian speaks. And originally, the language we started out with was pretty similar, right? So once you're in a different pocket, once, let's say, these people are colonizing this other world, their customs, their way of behavior, maybe even their language set might change somewhat because they're living in a different system. And that's going to obviously bring tensions, as it were, because when you have differences, that's what brings those tensions that then need to be resolved in order for people to work effectively together and to continue to function effectively. So I think my belief beyond even 50 years is that so long as human beings are evolving and are going to other planets or doing other things and intermarrying and creating new versions of themselves. But just like, for example, when you look at a country, let's say any country in Europe, and you might say, well, all these people are whatever, that whatever that location is. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll find out that the majority of them are made up of all these different tribes that at one point were at war with each other. And then eventually they emerge and they become this process of people mixing and creating other demographics and other groups, and these other groups having new tensions, and some old tensions maybe disappearing. This is an ongoing process. And so the need to have an understanding of how do we get people to work effectively together despite similarities or differences that cause tension? How do we get to, as businesses, to address markets and so forth? All of that, I think, is an ongoing topic that will be with us as long as humans are around.
As somebody who looks to the future and speaks about futurism, I had this conversation with Captain Hoff on Friday. It's really hard not to look at the future in an Iron Man or a Avengers type scenario where you have global governments, you have machines in the world, you have Martians, you have Earthlings. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you see that? How the world is unfolding so rapidly different, especially as AI and machines are accelerating that. Again, it's you have one man and Elon Musk who can affect war in parts of the world. I would love to hear your point of view on that, on the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are going to continue to evolve and adjust. The different generations that are born with different types of technologies and capabilities around them, their view of the world and how they do things is going to obviously be different. I mean, I remember when if I needed information, I had to get up early in the morning, get a pocket full of quarters and go to my local business library and take pictures of pages and books so that I could go back and paste together a report from my college thesis or program. Today, I don't have to do that. Today, I can just go in my computer and I can Google it, and you can do a lot of this stuff from your phone. Eventually, there might be other ways of doing it that are even faster and more efficient. Every time that we add capability and we change the way that people can relate to each other or interconnect with each other, we change the mix. And what happens is that the governing systems that we have and the business systems that we have generally tend to be shaped in order to support whatever state we were in when those practices or structures were formed. So they need to be evolved as well. And you constantly have this tension between people who want things to remain the same and people who embrace the future and want to pull the other way. I think that some of the things that we'll be doing maybe even 20 years from now will seem fantastic compared to what we can do now. And what we can do now is absolutely fantastic compared to what we could do 20 years ago. But you will have some resistance to it. And what I like to say is if you're a business person and in this environment where there's a lot of push and pull for and against different things, just remember, listen to the signal, not the noise. The signal is what tells you where we're going. Demographics are a signal. They're a signal. Demographics are a signal. The rise in AI, the automation, the globalization of markets, expansion into those are all signals because the technologies are here and they're just being put together and then used. And once you accomplish that, that changes the whole game. And now there's something else that you can do with that. So those are the signals. Everything else about resistance and we don't like the way things are going and so forth, that's just noise. It's the last gasp of the regressive crowd that wants the world to go backwards, but the world has never moved backwards. It always moves forward. Ask the Luddites. Ask the people who hated the cars when they rode horseback at the beginning of the century. Look around today. It's hard to find the blacksmith, but it's really easy to find the gas station, right? So the signals are what tell us where we're going, and where we're going is forward. We're not going back to any past and so forth. We're going forward. And I, for one, as you can probably tell, and I imagine you are too, I'm excited about it because I think that the future presents more and more opportunity for everyone to just do so much more, and to be able to achieve so much more. Half of the stuff that I do, like even consulting with different people, running my association and so forth, it would be impossible for me to do that and have the lifestyle I have, hopping around the world and living in an island for 2 months without the current technology we have today. And who knows what we'll be able to do in the next 10 or 20 years.
Listen to the signal, not the noise, with Joseph Santana. Wrapping up our conversation live in the lab. Joseph, I want to give you a quick minute here before we say goodbye to plug the podcast. You have the ERG Power Talk podcast, I believe it's called. You said your sixth season. For our listeners, give our listeners a reason to come listen to Joseph.
Yeah, I think the podcast, it's a specialized podcast. What I wanted to do is, in a lot of organizations, you have these different groups, and unfortunately, they were used for window dressing a lot. So you have the women's groups and so forth. And yet these groups are really valuable to an organization if organizations learn how to use them properly, which is to listen to them. They'll tell you what it is that's happening. A lot of these younger people that are in these groups know a lot more about what's happening in the market and know a lot more about what's needed in order to make the workforce happier and more effective than a lot of the senior leadership does, who are talking to each other and making these decisions without knowing what's going on at the grassroots of their own organizations. So I decided that I wanted to be someone who actually gave them the tools that they needed to be more effective, because in the past they had to go to conferences and so forth in order to hear speakers or learn some new skill. And organizations are not overly generous in sending, let's say, 20 or 50 people to these conferences. So even if they sent one or two, they weren't getting, some of them were not getting any kind of training or an opportunity to talk to thought leaders. So what I did was I put this podcast together where I bring together thought leaders on a variety of topics. Like, for example, we recently had one on the topic of coaching. We've had discussions on topics that have to do also with AI and its impact on organizations and how they can help to shape the AI in their organizations so it's more supportive of a modern workforce instead of a 20th century workforce. So the podcast, I've had some great people on it, and it's called ERG Power Talk. And it basically is designed to arm people with that kind of information. So if you're in a large company and you are part of one of these groups or want to start a group or want to understand how these groups work, that's a good place to go. It's free. Just plug in and listen at your leisure.
Joseph, thanks for joining me today here live in the lab. I really enjoyed the conversation on DEI. I learned a lot today, and I'm sure our audience has learned a lot from you on DEI. Any final comments or questions you have before we say goodbye?
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure being here, and I'm really happy to talk to an audience of people that are business-minded, because I think that the topic of DEI a lot of times is just contained to this HR world, which is where it started. And when it's contained to the HR world, it tends to become very superficial. It tends to become about, well, how do we check the box? How do we make sure we don't get in trouble? How do we make sure we keep the company's reputation intact? Those are not unimportant topics, but those topics alone will not drive forward some of the things that need to be done to make these organizations more effective in working with a future workforce and in the future marketplace. So happy to talk to a business group of people or people who are more business minded, because I think that's where the topic needs to go in order to make actual progress, as opposed to staying in the world of where it's all about PR and how can we make our company look like a nice company.
Awesome. Joseph, thanks for joining us today in the lab. If you can stick around for one quick second, I'm going to say goodbye. Everybody, come join us tomorrow, noon Central Time, lab -5 GMT. Special guest Trevinia Barber. We're going to talk about the work she does, helping CEOs find some of the greatest people on the planet to move their business forward. So tomorrow, noon Central, -5 GMT, live in the lab with myself, Keith Bilous. Joseph, we'll talk soon.
Pleasure being here.